Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to see you again. I hope you had a very nice lunch break and that you enjoyed this morning's session. So we had very nice introduction speeches in the very first part of the day to really look at how European instruments and international initiatives in general are driving international cooperation and renewable development in Africa. We also had a first deep dive, which was very insightful with many colleagues on how this cooperation can also help unlock the benefits, socioeconomic benefits, jobs, access to water, health, and other critical resources in this continent. And I am now very, very happy to be hosting this second deep dive session of our side event on solar business opportunities in emerging markets. I am Aurélie Beauvais, the Deputy CEO of SolarPower Europe, and very, very glad to be your host for the day and for this last session about green hydrogen in Africa. Now, green hydrogen, it is really something that is very trendy at the moment. We have seen that. It is definitely the case in Europe, where we see a lot of initiatives happening. What we know is that this technology may not be there yet, but the potential and the opportunities are very significant. And what is very interesting is also to see that, as usual, in emerging markets, we really see a leapfrogging phenomenon, jumping directly to the latest technologies. And that's also why we thought it was very interesting already today to explore how the hydrogen market and the renewable hydrogen market in particular is kind of cooking in Africa. What is the state of play? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges probably as well? And also exchanging with our very nice panelists about the timing and the sequence, because I think when we have the whole discussion about renewable hydrogen and when we talk about areas with half of the population that doesn't even have access to electricity, the how you do it, with whom you do it, and what are the criteria that you need to take into account for developing those green hydrogen projects is absolutely critical. So to explore all those dimensions, I am absolutely delighted to have a very nice panel with me today, Mr. Solomon Nwabweze Agbo, which is Senior Scientist and Project Manager at, apology, I cannot pronounce that, I'm too French, but I will say Fochun Grenstrom Julich. And apologies for that, you will present that much better than me. We have Charlotte Hussy. I see Charlotte smiling too, but GIZ is much easier to say, advisor for power fuels at GIZ, so the German Development Corporation. Dr. Chipo Shoniwa, which is a national team leader for the project Green H2 Atlas, who will talk to us a bit about Southern Africa, and Fortunate Farirai, which is national team leader for the H2 Atlas project, and she will talk to us about Zimbabwe. So thank you so much to everyone for being here. I'm absolutely delighted to host this conversation, which I think is going to be very interesting. And without further ado, I'm very happy to hand over to Solomon, which is really driving the H2 Atlas project from Europe as well, and ensuring the coordination of all this project across Africa itself. Solomon, can you tell us about this H2 Atlas project, and what does it tell us about green hydrogen in Africa?
So thank you very much for that introduction, and I'm really very glad to be here and to be able to share the work we are doing with the H2 Atlas project with the rest of the people who are in the platform. So thank you again for the invitation. So the project is H2 Atlas Africa. So I will just present quickly an overview of what we are doing in the project, and then some of the insights we already received with regards to the work that we have done already. So the project actually started, alongside when the German government launched the National Hydrogen Strategy. And within the National Hydrogen Strategy, it was very clear that if hydrogen has hydrogen has a very key role to play in terms of decarbonizing the energy sector, in terms of bringing in new value to the energy mix. And so it is very clear that green hydrogen will be the way to go. And like we all know, global warming is a national issue, and if this is the case, then it will require a cross-border initiative to drive. So it's in this understanding that the BMBF, so the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, decided to explore a partnership with Africa and then to be able to look at also the possibilities or the potentials that exist for green hydrogen generation in Africa as a partner in this global effort to drive economy via green hydrogen. So what's the project all about? So the H2 Atlas project, the next slide, please. So the H2 Atlas project basically is aimed at profiling or finding out the potentials of green hydrogen generation in Africa. So looking at the technological, but also looking at the environmental and socio-economic feasibility assessment for Africa as a whole. So as a starting point, we started with West and Southern Africa. So we started in January of last year, and we would be doing this also till the end and beginning of next year. So the main partners are the Research Center ULIS, Operation Centrum ULIS. So we have the technical lead, and then we have partners also in Africa. So we have WASCA, the West African Science Service Center for Climate Change and Land Use in Accra. That's helping us to coordinate the whole of the ECOWAS region. And then we have the counterpart in that's called SASCAL in Windhoek in Namibia. That's also helping us to coordinate the rest of the Southern African region. And we also have some other associate partners like like SACRI. So SACRI is the energy efficiency, renewable energy and energy efficiency arm of SADC. And then the partner ICRI, that's equivalent of the same energy and renewable energy and energy efficiency of ECOWAS. So they are also partners, and these are quite strategic partners. I'll talk about that a bit later. So like I said before, so the main aim is to create a database to show what potentials exist in these regions for the production of green hydrogen, and how much this, of course, in one way will profit the local people, and then of course in another way to contribute to the global effort to drive to bring hydrogen into the mainstream of the energy mix, as also we're also addressing the issue of global climate change. Okay, so the question is, the next slide please. So the question is, why Africa? So why is Africa in focus? There are a couple of reasons. Number one, please, the next slide, you would see, you see that in Africa we have huge renewable energy potential. So whether you look up in the north or down in the south, or even across the west through the east, you see huge renewable energy potentials in terms of wind, in terms of solar. And then another very big resource available in Africa is land. So we have vast land resources. Actually, it puts the whole of the US, the whole of Europe together in terms of land mass, land area. For example, the whole of Africa is much bigger. So that's huge. That's a huge resource. I'll talk about this again and how this translates to green hydrogen production. But then another thing you find about resources in Africa is we have huge human capacity. So if you look at this this graph, you would see that the median age in Africa, it's less than 20. So this is huge in terms of capacity. And then you would also see that in terms of water, you also have a lot of resources. So there are several rivers with catchment areas that's over 100,000 kilometers. You have several lakes running into several kilometers, and then we have Africa has 1/3 of the world's major international water basins. So these are also huge resources, and these are resources that are very relevant for the production of green hydrogen. So whether in terms of human capacity, in terms of water, in terms of renewable energy resources, in terms of even land availability, because you would need land to be able to place your infrastructure, whether it is the renewable energy resources that you would want to harness, or even the infrastructure in general you need for your green hydrogen technology, you would need land, and then you have this quite a lot in Africa. So the other thing that also makes Africa attractive is the fact that you have, apart from these resources, you also have opportunities. The next slide, please. You have huge opportunities, then you also have a lot of prospects. So the development in Africa in terms of GDP has also been very impactful in terms of its contribution to the global GDP in the last few years. And I think that because of the growing need, I think this trend will continue also in the years to come, that Africa continues to bring a lot in the table in terms of its contribution to global GDP. So in terms of prospect, in terms of opportunity, in terms of markets, there are lots of opportunities and possibilities in Africa as a whole. So these are basically why it's relevant that Africa contributes in terms of being a big market for not just green hydrogen generation, but also utilization. The next slide, please. So the question is, so within our project, like I said before, we started with West Africa and Southern Africa as a starting point. And in West Africa, we are actually covering the whole of the ECOWAS countries, so the 15 countries in ECOWAS. And then in Southern Africa, we're actually technically looking at also all the countries in SADC. Next slide, please. So within our research center, we have a number of institutes that are involved in this project because it is highly interdisciplinary. So we have institutes that are looking at just as doing an assessment on renewable energy potentials. So we have institutes that are also looking at the photovoltaics, for example, looking at the relevant models that you would need to be able to quantify or to be able to estimate renewable energy potentials that you have. We have also groups that are looking at also the socioeconomic and political context that are relevant for green hydrogen generation. Then we also have institutes within our research center that are specifically looking at water availability at this point, just looking at groundwater, doing the groundwater mapping, finding where you have suitable and rechargeable groundwater that can drive green hydrogen production in the whole of Africa, West and Southern Africa. Okay, so this is our approach, and this is very important for us in the project. One thing that for us is very underlining in the project is that every stakeholder, it's important. Whether for us here in Germany or our partners in Africa, our stakeholders we take very seriously, and our approach is that it's important at the end that you have a win-win situation in the partnership. So we have the project structured in a way that it reflects this approach. So in each country, we have a coordination team, and this coordination team is made up of experts taken from the different ministries and government agencies that are relevant or that has something to do with the subject. Then we also, these national teams, then they help us together with the project to discuss, to somehow generate national dialogue, to make sure that you get input from the local people. You bring in also the local perspective, the local preferences in the discussion in terms of what we do in the project and then what has to be done afterwards. So this is very important for, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, where the topic is still beginning to pick up. The next slide, please. So this is within the project, this is a basic overview of our guiding criteria. So first, we are looking at, like I said before, basic assessment criteria for what we are doing. So we look at land eligibility. So this is very important that we look at the total land area, but then take out or do an assessment to make sure you take out land that is available for other land uses. So you have land use for agriculture, you have land use for residential buildings, you have land use for reserved, you have land reserved for parks and all that. So in partnership with our partners, our different countries, we find out for what these reserved areas are for each country, and then we take out all of this so that we are able to find the land that's actually eligible for green hydrogen production. This is very important because it is in the land that you're going to build up your PV parks or build up your wind parks. And we also do not want to have a situation where you have a conflict of use in terms of having to use land that is marked by the people for some other purposes. So then within the assessment, we also look at renewable energy potential. So where we look at how much you have in terms of PV, how much power you can generate, technically how much you can also generate from wind, not just wind onshore and offshore. So we do all of that. So that's where we are at the moment, PV, wind, onshore and offshore. In our next step, we're also going to be looking at hydro potential. Then we look at the hydrogen infrastructure placement. So like I said, where and how, then try to make a design of an energy system that's able to put all of this together. Then we look at the local demands, so the local preferences. This is very important. You look at the energy situation within the different locations or the different countries where the supply would be necessary for the local use, first of all, where a part of this can be used also to drive local activities. So these are all aspects that we take into consideration in the project. The next slide, please. So just a summary of the guidelines that we take into consideration and that we have taken into consideration in the work that we are doing. So we look at the geography, the environment, the resources, like I said, just to ensure that we do not have any conflict of use, whether it is water, whether it is land. Then we are also looking at the future climate development. This is very important because if you have resources like water, you have resources like land, we are making a projection into 50, 100 years from now. How does the climate change affect resources that are available, whether it is water or land and all of that? So this is very important. And we are looking at also, of course, the renewable energy potentials like I talked about. We're looking at infrastructure and logistics. So whether you have the deep sea, whether you have already existing pipelines, networks, looking at the grid infrastructure and possibility to either do a grid system or a standalone system. Then we are also factoring in the different political situation in the different countries, the ease of doing business, the climate, the situation that supports the production of green hydrogen in the different countries. Then we are looking at also, of course, the labor markets and looking at the local needs, how much capacity exists for hydrogen utilization, and then what the other possibilities are that can be explored for the different countries. So these are basically our guiding principles. Okay, so this is how our work is structured. So we have the input in terms of data. So we have a huge data set. Some of this we collected from open source data. Some of this also we collected in partnership together with our partners for the different countries. Then we have several models that we have broken down. So we have the model broken down in different work packages, looking at different things like I already talked about, so land eligibility, socio-political context, future climate, renewable energy potential assessment, and all of that, water availability, then the local demands. So in the end, we have these results put together in an atlas, so an interactive atlas that shows the hydrogen potentials in terms of numbers. So we are able to quantify technically the amount of hydrogen that you can generate in each of the locations. Then we are also able to quantify in terms of cost, the unit price of a kilo of hydrogen in each of the locations in all the countries that are involved in this project. The next slide, please. Okay, so like I said, so in the end, this would be what we deliver, an atlas that is interactive, that will of course be available for the public. And then in the end, we will quantify, so in terms of cost, in terms of numbers, how much quantity can be generated and at what cost. This would be important for all stakeholders. And then we are going to come up with concepts for pilot project. I'll talk about this in some of our findings at the end. Okay, the next slide. So just to give an indication of our initial results, this will still be made public. At the moment, there would be a press release. This was supposed to happen a few days ago, but for some reasons this was shifted. So this would happen by the 20th of May. There's going to be a formal press release of these results by the BMBF. So the German ministry that is funding the research. But at the moment, I could just say one from our results. So the renewable energy potentials in Africa is huge. really. So whether it's PV, whether it's onshore and offshore wind, huge, huge in terms of number and huge in terms of the cost. Cost, I mean, is comparable to what you could get anywhere else in any part of the world. The cost is quite competitive, very competitive, highly attractive, and then the numbers are huge. Then the second thing I would like to mention, like I said, so at this moment in our project, we have limited our investigation to groundwater. We are going to expand, of course, but our initial, one of the initial indicators that we see clearly is that you cannot really depend on just groundwater. So there is a big limitation to the maximum technical potential of green hydrogen generation that you can get if you just rely on groundwater. So this is a huge limiting factor. And so the way to go really would be to explore using desalinated water, which has been shown that this doesn't cost too much in terms of numbers, in terms of cost. And then another thing I would like to say strongly is that there is a huge potential to also do a cross-border resource exchange in terms of building up a green hydrogen infrastructure for the region. So whether it is West Africa or Southern Africa. So because sometimes you see that the locations where you have the best of renewable energy may not be exactly where you have the best of water resources. So there could be a possibility that countries could get into some form of agreement to either exchange water, transport water, or transport electricity, depending on the infrastructure that's available. So in the end, this would be very relevant, to maximize existing resources and, of course, strengthen cross-border cooperation. So these are basically the initial results. And then finally, I would like to end with some other, the next slide, just to conclude with some other parts of the H2 Atlas project. So one is a graduate school. So the BMBF is funding a master's program that's established in 4 different African countries that will really have a focus on renewable energy and green hydrogen. So this master's program will start in October. So we are currently recruiting students. So in total, there will be 60 students across West Africa. And this program is being supported from our research center together with our partner university, RWTH Aachen, and also being funded by the BMBF. So this is just to support the local capacity building, to really accelerate the uptake of the technology in Africa. So this is very important if the technology has to really be sustainable when it kicks off in Africa, that we build some local know-how. And we will do this also, some form of training for our partners, also in terms of technical know-how in the technology. Okay, so that's it from my side, and that's a quick overview of what we're doing in the project. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Solomon. I mean, first, congratulations, because I think this project, the H2 Atlas, even myself, I'm quite looking forward to the results, because I think it's in the EU, we talk a lot about that, about potentially making Africa an export hub, etc. We're going to talk about it afterwards, but I think such projects are actually necessary first step to really look at the resources, and I think many companies and stakeholders are going to await for these results very fiercely. Also heard your call for students, so I'm sure we have plenty of students in the audience. That's your chance. 60 spots I heard, so do not hesitate to contact Solomon after the conversation if you're interested actually to take part in this exciting project. So from the general overview, and thanks a lot, we will go again into the details of this project. We are going to go one level down from Africa to South Africa, so already closing a bit more the scope and the focus. Dr. Chipo Shoniwa, so you're one of the team leaders, one of those local sustainability soldiers, kind of, which are contributing to making this success, this project successful, gathering local data. What can you tell us about the hydrogen potential then in South Africa, according to the data that you have been able to collect at this point in time?
Thank you very much. Can you share?
Yes, I can hear you.
Am I presenting my slides now? Can you share my slides or?
Yes, we will share it in a minute. Can someone put Chipo's slide? Because I still see Charlotte. It will take a second, I guess. Okay, it's there. Super. Go ahead, Chipo.
Okay, I'm Chipo Shoniwa from Zimbabwe. Actually, a point of correction, I am a team member for Zimbabwe Hydrogen Atlas Group, but I'm going to present on South Africa. Next slide, please. I will start with the renewable energy potential in South Africa. It's already been alluded by Solomon. For us to come up with green hydrogen, we need renewable energy resources. So for South Africa, there is great potential for the production of renewable energies. I'll look at the solar energy. The country has a vast amount of solar energy. In fact, it has about 2,500 sunshine hours per year. With that amount of solar energy, we are sure that if we want to do electrolysis of water from solar, we will be able to do that because we are able to get enough electricity from this renewable energy resource, because it's abundant in the country. Also, another major important renewable energy resource for the production of green hydrogen is wind. In South Africa, wind is usually measured at a height of 10 meters. At that 10 meters height, which is very close to the ground, the average wind speeds are between 5.6 and 8.7 meters per second. And as we know, the higher we go, the wind speeds would increase. If wind turbines are to be installed, they will not be at a height of 10 meters. They will be up, maybe above 100 meters, above 50 meters. At that speed, at that size, the wind speeds are great. We are sure of getting high amounts of electricity, which will be able to power our electrolyzers and come up with green hydrogen. We also have great hydro potential in the country from dams and rivers which flow perennially. We have about 4.8 gigawatts potential for hydroelectricity. So with these amounts of renewable energy resources, the country is so sure that what we only need are the resources to set up the infrastructure for production of green hydrogen, because the raw materials for that are there. Next slide. We have the advantages or pros, the reasons why we think hydrogen potential is there in South Africa. Already the government of South Africa is developing positively. It has started developing a hydrogen roadmap. So it's a roadmap which shows how the country will go about in taking up this green hydrogen so that it converts the country to a green hydrogen economy. This support from the government is a positive for green hydrogen. So the government is hailed for that. The major research center in the country, CSIR, is advocating for producing hydrogen having dedicated renewable hydrogen infrastructure, because at the moment, the IPPs who are developing electricity from renewable energies are selling that electricity to Eskom, the national utility for the country. And with that, there is nothing which is left for green hydrogen. If we have dedicated renewable infrastructure, we are assured that we will have full load hours to meet the green hydrogen electrolyzers requirements for electricity. So if this advocacy continues and if it's taken up, it's a plus for green hydrogen. We also have South Africa, which is an importer of fuels. So it doesn't have local capacity, it doesn't have local sources of fossil fuels. It imports from other countries. And we have already said it has resources for production of green hydrogen. If the country is able to produce green hydrogen, then it will increase its energy security. It will increase the availability of local energy. So that's a plus for the country to have local production of energy. So this gives great potential for the uptake of green hydrogen in the country. The country has got vast amounts of platinum, which is a major resource in the production of hydrogen fuel cells, which are used for the storage of this hydrogen. So that local availability will make sure that the country will valorize its minerals and will be able to export even that green hydrogen, will be able even to export those fuel cells. In so doing, the country will generate foreign currency, which is much needed in the country for its development. There is already significant vehicle manufacturing facilities in the country. We have the companies like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Toyota already manufacturing vehicles in the country. If there is uptake of green hydrogen, these companies will in the end also start producing hydrogen fuel powered vehicles in the country. And the market is there. People are using fossil fuels, which are contributing to abatement, which are contributing to anthropogenic climate change. So the introduction of hydrogen powered vehicles would be welcome in the country. Since the fuel will be produced locally, it will, in the end, when there is mass production, cause the mobility to be a little bit cheaper as it is now. It will also make the country make its contribution to the abatement of climate change. We also have of recent, Toyota, which is one of the vehicle producing countries in the country, has signed a contract with the Sasol, where they are wanting to develop green hydrogen mobility ecosystem in the country. That's a plus in the country. It shows that already different stakeholders are coming together to take up this green hydrogen. Once it is produced, valorization would occur and it will be of great importance in the country. So with these advantages, with these developments already taking place in the country, we are assured that South Africa is going very soon to be moving towards a green hydrogen economy. And us in Zimbabwe, being the neighbor of South Africa, we are sure we'll be following suit, because most of our things we get from South Africa. But for this green hydrogen, we want to keep pace with them, such that we don't want to go to import from them. We would also want to be exporting to them. Next slide, please.
You will have in 1 minute, Chipo, soon.
We have the challenges. Independent power producers are finding it difficult because they said they are selling their power to Eskom. We need them to be independent. We have some recurring droughts in the country in the past decades. This has limited the amount of water, but Solomon has suggested maybe the use of underground water, and also South Africa being surrounded by the seas, the ocean, then water can be taken from the sea, although maybe the cost might be a bit high due to desalination processes. Then we have these water shortages might make other maybe stakeholders want water to be limited to other uses rather than for electrolysis. Next slide, please. So some steps have already been suggested so that the country moves towards green hydrogen. There is need to finalize the hydrogen strategy in the roadmap. There is need to clear ministerial direction around which government ministry would house this green hydrogen. There is the Ministry of Energy. There is also the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So that needs to be cleared. There is need to assess regulation enabling competitive markets in the country. If some regulations are developed, then it's easier to follow those regulations in the process. There should be need for fast tracking of licensing of renewable energy production, which would lead to hydrogen production. There is need of signing up of collaboration agreements between hydrogen producers, off-takers, and various technology players. Next slide, please.
You will need to finish, Chipo. Huh?
So these are the references which I used. As I said, I'm not South African. I had to read to get this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chipo. I think that was that's really insightful and complementary actually to what Solomon presented. I really look forward to discussing further with you as well, potentially the use cases. It's interesting to have the focus on the car manufacturing and see the synergies there potentially, and we can discuss that at a later stage. So thank you so much. Maybe to finish with the H2 Atlas overview before we go into the perspective of a development cooperation agency. Charlotte, if that is okay with you, I will give the floor next to Fortunate Farirai, which if you could, Fortunate, in 5 to 7 minutes, give us the overview of the H2 Atlas from Zimbabwe. So I think we've gone to the whole continent, from a more regional approach to one country focus. I know that also on your side, obviously, the data is still on the process of being gathered, but what can you tell us on this particular country about green hydrogen? Can you hear us, Fortunate? Maybe you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction. Maybe what I can safely say, maybe initially when we spoke about this, we might not even be in a position to share on H2 Atlas project, but I would just share mainly on what Zimbabwe has been doing before on when it comes to hydrogen. Special mention goes to like our coordinator for the project, Dr. Jane Olge, and also Dr. Solomon here present, coordinating the project from ULICH. And also special mention goes on to Charlotte Hassey, who actually referred us, forwarded our names from Women in Green Hydrogen. Thank you so much for that. Let me go into my presentation. Next slide. Okay, I will talk more on the energy situation in Zimbabwe. You would find that the national electrification currently is at 42%, where we have the installed capacity at 2,300 megawatts, and the current generation capacity is actually at 1,050 megawatts, and the peak demand is at 2,200 megawatts. And we are looking at the deficit of 1,250 megawatts. And you would find that green hydrogen is a potential also to cover on the deficit, which is experienced in the country. And this currently we are having also the issue of load shedding because of winter. So you'd find that the green hydrogen coming into play will actually serve an important role in actually making sure that there is access to clean and affordable energy. Next slide. Okay, so the green hydrogen potential at national level, you find that Zimbabwe has a lot of potential to green hydrogen due to the abundance of renewable energy resources. And you'd find that in Zimbabwe, we experience about 3,000 sunshine hours per year, and a number of solar projects and wind projects has been done in the country through independent power producers. And also, I'm going to draw more on a case study of a company that has been generating hydrogen, not specifically green hydrogen, but hydrogen for fertilizer manufacture, which is Sebo Chemicals. Next slide. Okay, so why I'm going to cover on the why the interest is mainly on green hydrogen these days. You would find that there are cost reduction projections that are currently there. You would find that at the current stage, a kilogram of green hydrogen is costing between $2.50 to $6.80. And by 2030, it is projected to drop to $1.40 a kilogram. And also by 2050, it can go down to 80 cents per kilogram. So there is need to reduce carbon emissions to combat climate change, and the cost competitive and cost is projected to drop, like what I mentioned. And also, you would find that because of the renewable energy resources that are abundant in Zimbabwe, there is also potential to export this green hydrogen to other neighboring countries, those countries which might be experiencing less renewable energy resources. Next slide. So this is actually a company which is a local company here in Zimbabwe, Sebo Chemicals, which is actually mainly in the manufacture of fertilizer. So you'd find that Zimbabwe's economy is anchored more on agriculture. So this company's functionality is actually beneficial to the country, considering that the fertilizer that will be manufactured from hydrogen, which is actually the ammonia production, you would find that it's actually of importance to the economy, as we know that we have a lot of agricultural produce in our country, and we are also focusing more on exporting a lot of agricultural products to other countries. Next slide. So this is the location, the specific location of where Sebo Chemicals is located here in Zimbabwe. And you would find that this company was established in 1969, and due to the low cost and abundance of energy in that time, it had to establish an electrolysis plant in 1972, and the hydrogen was produced, and it was mainly as a chemical that was used for the manufacture of ammonia. So you would find that this technology of hydrogen production in Zimbabwe is not new. The only new thing will be that the hydrogen will be now, the energy resource that will be needed to split water would be coming from the from a renewable energy source. Next slide. Okay, so this is actually mentioning, just summarizing the quantity of ammonia that would be produced, about 115,000 tons of ammonia that would be produced, which was about 63% that was needed for the manufacture of fertilizer. And you would find that the system used to use about 105 megawatts of electricity for the electrolysis of water. But moving forward, next slide. Moving forward, the plant was decommissioned. The plant was decommissioned because of the high energy requirements. It was decommissioned in 2015. And actually now the company is now importing the ammonia for the manufacture of fertilizer, and it's now using just 10 megawatts of electricity. So there is more potential to actually ramp in the renewable energy resources so that they can actually, especially solar, it can be used for the electrolysis of water, and actually we can actually locally produce the hydrogen instead of importing the ammonia. Next slide.
1 minute, Fortunate. Perfect.
Okay. So in conclusion, I can say that in Zimbabwe, there is so much potential to produce this green hydrogen, considering what I have mentioned earlier, the renewable energy resources, about 3,000 sunshine hours per year. And actually, you would find that there is actually ready market, especially for the fertilizer manufacture. There is ready market for it, considering that our economy is mainly anchored on agriculture. So with that, I can say thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm very much grateful that I've been given this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fortunate, and thank you for this presentation. It's great to see that actually, indeed, the hydrogen economy is starting to move, and also that there are some pre-existing infrastructure. That was a good example that you provided also with installation, which is actually quite old. So I think we'll have an interesting conversation afterwards as to the stepping stones from now to then enabling potentially a renewable hydrogen economy in Africa. So for the last presentation, before we enter the debate, really happy to hand over the floor to you, Charlotte. GIZ has been already extremely involved across a variety of projects, obviously supporting the deployment of renewables in Africa. Can you tell us what you're doing on hydrogen, and what is your perspective, your approach to developing such projects today? And you are mute, sorry.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also very exciting, of course, to hear from the country stories, and also from the H2 Atlas and all the experience. Very excited to learn more from the publications later this year. If we want to start with the presentation, I really want to add here, I mean, I'm based in Germany, but GIZ has offices all over the world, so I really want to share my perspectives now from the perspectives of a development cooperation agency. Next slide, please. And maybe a short introduction who we are. So for the people who don't know GIZ, we are 100% government owned, a non-profit company, and we support the German government in reaching sustainability goals and implementation of national agreements like the SDGs and also the Paris Agreement. And we work project-based, meaning that we mainly work for the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, but also for the Ministry of Environment and other EU and governmental actors and partners. And as I said, we work worldwide, especially in developing and emerging countries, more than 120 countries worldwide, and more than 1,600 projects. So it's really a big range between access to power, but also other sustainability goals that we are looking forward to, access to food, water, etc. So on the next slide, I will talk about our activities we do in green hydrogen currently. So again, the map where we see the potentials of sun and wind leading to different costs, of course, across Southern Africa. Maybe I don't want to do, again, like a top-down view, but more a bottom-up view, so that we can see, okay, what projects have already been installed in sub-Saharan Africa. And we see two countries, again, South Africa, Zimbabwe. We already had a deep dive, so we can win maybe some minutes now that we can use well in the discussion. I wanted to include also Morocco and the Northern African region, because of course we all have a lot of activities there as well, due to the proximity also to Europe and to Germany. But today the focus is really on the other four projects that we can see here. The first project, next slide. It's an example from South Africa. We already learned from Chipo very interesting facts. Something that I want to add maybe, or that I think is very exciting in South Africa, is that Sasol is currently already operating a Fischer-Tropsch reactor. And Fischer-Tropsch, for the people who are not chemical experts here, is the reactor that is needed to create synthetic fuels, basically. And currently this is the fuel is based on coal liquefaction, because of course Africa has a lot of coal resources. And with this, there's a high potential of reducing CO2 emissions of Sasol, which is actually the second largest CO2 emitter of the country, when we replace this coal liquefaction with hydrogen. So this is possible, and of course a big potential. And therefore, as we learned already from Chipo, there's a big also interest, political interest. We have the high platinum resources we already talked about. And this is also why, of course, GIZ is quite interested in the exchange there. They're also the bilateral government discussion between Germany and South Africa led to an agreement that we want to work very closely together, Germany and South Africa. And also South Africa and Germany have a very long basis of cooperation through the South African-German energy partnerships. So we already helped and or supported in setting up the hydrogen roadmap. And we work on certification norms and standards. And also for the future, we look into capacity development and setting up networks through, for example, also South-South exchanges, study tours, business platforms, and very closely with, of course, financial cooperation. We look into innovation calls to support research organizations, and also go into the project preparation through scoping studies, in-depth project studies, and technical assistance. So we're really happy to support and work together very closely with the partners in South Africa. The next example is, on the next slide, a bit different. And here in Nigeria and Angola, we see that from the map, it doesn't look like the highest potential, but what makes the countries very interesting is that they have huge exports in crude petroleum. So the whole economy is actually based on those petroleum exports, almost 90%. So we, as GIZ, are currently working on energy policy dialogues, also to sensibilize the decision makers in the countries to say, okay, there are ways on how to transform the energy and fuel economies using green hydrogen and power to X. Next slide. Zimbabwe, we also learned a lot about it, so maybe I can skip the slide, just maybe adding, we are also talking about this use case of the existing infrastructure also of Sable Chemicals. So we also are or my colleagues, of course, who work very closely together with Sable and also with the government in Zimbabwe on looking on how to use actually this potential. And they helped also applying for a technical feasibility study at the African Development to get some insights on technical and economic feasibility of this project. And also there are discussions about other possible technical and financial cooperation measures together with Zimbabwe. Next slide. the last slide is about Kenya. And Kenya is maybe the most straightforward case because Kenya has a surplus of renewable electricity in many days of a year. Over 90% of the electricity comes from renewable sources, hydro, geothermal, and solar, and the production is also quite competitive. So they are not yet at 2 cents per kilowatt hour, but there is the potential to go there. And they also look really, or the motivation is also to decrease the import dependency of oil-derived fuels. And they see themselves as very well positioned as a hydrogen hub for Eastern Africa because they have significant harbor capacities for export and also industrial clusters. And they have a relatively well-developed financial sector, which is, of course, also very important, the access to finance. And we at GIZ also have a very strong collaboration with Kenya because, the partners or the colleagues in the country are very active, also discussing with the government. Me and my team, we also conducted the training for GIZ partners, for the Ministry of Energy, the development banks, and also diplomats to understand a bit also the narrative. And the colleagues have supported in setting up a baseline study or TORs for baseline studies and workshops to really identify the potential for Power-to-X and look into the costs, benefits, risks, and also possible pathways for Kenya. And Green Hydrogen Working Group has been set up, and this is chaired by the Ministry of Energy, so we see high-level involvement in Kenya. So maybe to sum up, on the last slide, we see a lot of potential also in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have maybe every week I get a call from a country in South Africa with a new case. But it's also very interesting and very important, of course, to identify what are real potentials and what is possible. And I think there are some very, very important preconditions, and we learned a lot about them already. And maybe the most important is, of course, that we need significant shares of low-cost renewable energies already, and also there should be high potentials for further expansion. So the precondition for Power-to-X and hydrogen is always a well set up renewable electricity economy. And of course, financing costs and good country ratings are important, and political frameworks and involvement of the local population. But I see this is going in a good direction also with the Hydrogen Atlas. Very important, and this is also experience we have from other countries like Chile, where we work a lot on hydrogen. We always need off-takers. So the investment case doesn't work if we don't have off-takers who are willing and able to finance. And this can be, of course, different people, different actors. The first goal would always, is there maybe a cement industry, another industrial hub that would need hydrogen as a resource? Export, of course, it's also an option, and we are also looking into niche and research project, which would be maybe the Zimbabwe case. So this is how we see it from our perspective, and I think we can do some more deep dives in the discussion that will follow now. Thank you.
Indeed, thanks a lot, Charlotte. And I think indeed our audience already has a very encompassing view, I think, of the overall potential, a bit of the level of readiness when it comes to the whole green hydrogen discussion, because when I first saw the theme of this session, for example, I was not expecting in the prep and in the exchanges with you all to, for example, already see projects happening. It's quite impressive, because when you see, for example, I mean, there are not more fossil-based or blue CCS projects that are already in operation rather than green projects. It remains quite new, and even in Europe, whereas there are a lot of pilot and demonstrations that are kicking in, we do not have projects which are established already. So we're talking about a very, very early phase. Maybe, I mean, as a start, because I think there is still a paradox which we need to address together here, and that's a question which I will ask to all of you, starting maybe with Solomon. But we had this session this morning about access to electricity, and it was recorded by all of you. Half of the population in Africa doesn't have access to electricity. How can this be combined with the idea that we are already reinitiating or initiating a green hydrogen economy, which relies, per definition, entirely on electricity? I mean, how can that be combined? Solomon, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much once again for the opportunity. So let me speak from the point of view of what we have so far done. Like I mentioned during my speech, Africa has huge renewable energy potential. So whether you look at wind, whether you look at PV, so you have huge potential. And our is part of what we have seen so far is that, yes, you have like 50% of the population without access. But if you have to meet this demand from renewable energy, you have the potential enough to make up this deficit from renewable energy and still have enough to generate substantial amount of green hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Without,
Would you agree? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do not think that it's not outright that you do not have a place for green hydrogen because you still have a lot of place without access. So that's why I said in the beginning, we take local preference into it. This is very important because there are the situations, even though in generally speaking, you have 50% without access, but the situation still varies from country to country. So there are places where the situation is a lot better, and it's depending on the local preference. You could take a part of the renewable energy actually to meet the local demand in terms of providing access to electricity, but then we still have enough potentials to drive the hydrogen initiative.
Thank you, Solomon. So what I get actually from what you say is it can work together, but the bottom line is that those renewables capacities are not built yet, basically. So they will need to be built in order to deliver those two priorities at the same time.
Yes, so the resources are there. We just need an infrastructure to harness them.
Okay, so let's discuss then about how to harvest this. Maybe, I mean, Charlotte, from the perspective then of the GIZ, because sustainability is very important, obviously. I guess also for you, it's important that the green hydrogen boom doesn't cannibalize, on the other hand, the access to electricity. So talking about additionality, well, how important is that for you, and how to ensure that it is happening on the ground?
Yeah, very important question. And I think for me, additionality is really one of the main factors and also the main criteria, sustainability criteria of all of them, because we don't want to be in competition with hydrogen, with any other access to electricity or direct uses. Also talking about maybe more modern direct uses like electrification of the transport sector, because it's always more efficient to use it directly rather to transform it to hydrogen and lose 30%. And then maybe for export, we have to even reconvert it to hydrogen or something. So there's a lot of losses that we would see if we go only in the direction of hydrogen. So when we talk to our partner countries, it's also something that we say, there are two steps. No, we have the money and we have the brain, and we usually say, okay, the brain can go into hydrogen already, and it should go into hydrogen because it's a long process to have a change in an infrastructure, and especially in energy infrastructure. It can take 20 years. So it's important to start with the research, to start with the feasibility studies, and to see where is potential there, what could be potential off-takers, and so on. But for the finance, I would say in many cases, not in all of the cases, it's really important to do first the renewable electricity. So this prepares, it's a precondition for hydrogen anyway. So we need electricity or renewable electricity for hydrogen, but we also need it for everything else. So there's no way that this is the wrong decision to invest into renewable electricity for a country. But maybe not too fast going with setting up infrastructure, because as you said, we are only at the beginning of the learning curves also for cost reduction. So the decrease will come, as we saw with PV in the last 20 years, and it would make sense then to be ready to install the capacities when the cost decrease has arrived.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So indeed, this long-term process to keep in mind in terms of developing the technology, because it's true that there are kind of two challenges at the same time: developing the technology ensuring that we have the cost abutments for the technology, and deploying the renewables that we will need to power those electrolyzers, because we're really talking here about electricity specific if we talk for renewable. Maybe from the perspective then of the renewable deployment and looking into the countries, Fortunate, do you think in Zimbabwe we are deploying renewables at a pace that would be satisfactory in order to produce renewable hydrogen and ensure access to electricity? How is it going, renewable deployment?
Okay, thank you so much for that. What I can safely say is that because of the high initial capital cost for renewable energy projects, you would find that it's not being deployed at a faster rate as we would intend, because we would find that sometimes the issues we would have technical expertise there will be there, but when it comes to the proper execution, it needs money. So you would find that the challenge of the capital is actually making it to delay to actually ramp in these renewable energy technologies. But nevertheless, you would find that the opportunities are there, and the abundance renewable energy sources are there, and the only challenge will be the capital costs, which are high at the beginning. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Fortunate. Do you agree, Chipo? So high capital costs that may impede the deployment of renewables in Zimbabwe and neighboring regions. Do you think there are alternatives? I mean, how can we build all these renewables in the next decade?
Thank you. I think the major thing that we need to know about green hydrogen and electricity is that these are complementary. At the moment, energy from renewable resources is being stored in batteries, which are very expensive. Maybe the most expensive part for the renewable energy resources. If this green hydrogen is produced and stored in fuel cells, then it can be used for anything that is powered by electricity. So it can solve even the electricity shortage at peak hours. So if we take into account that they have the high initial cost, but the advantages are much more than the initial cost. So we need to secure some resources such that we move a bit fast to deploy renewable energy resources, and we don't want to separate them from green hydrogen, because green hydrogen is a good storage for them and it's easier to transport. In most countries, we have infrastructure in terms of pipelines for transportation of green hydrogen, and if used in fuel cells, as I have said, it can complement electricity. So besides the high costs, we need our communities, our governments to put much more effort in securing resources for the deployment of these resources. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So indeed, Chipo, the complementarity, I mean, it's really interesting also to look at the end of the day at the infrastructure question, because it's true that your green hydrogen is gonna depend on an electrolyzer. It has to be somehow connected to a grid and hopefully to a producing installations. So that's one challenge. And then there is the other challenge, because okay, we have pipes in Africa, in some African countries, but we don't have hydrogen ready pipes, because we know also that those infrastructures will have to be adapted. So yes, how close are we to solve this challenge? Who would like to take this question? How are we in terms of infrastructure? Are we ready to talk about, let's say, Africa becoming a green hydrogen hub? What is the state of play there? Who would like to take this one?
Can I take it?
Go ahead, please.
At the moment, most countries are still on the negative side, they haven't started much on the infrastructure side. Still, there is some ground research which is being done to find out what infrastructure is there, what form of adaptation is needed, what financial resources are needed, and what human resources are needed for that adaptation. So in most countries, it's still at the research point where we need to find the recommendations from these researchers. Then we move on and advise the policymakers such that we move on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chipo. Maybe bouncing a bit also the question to Charlotte. Looking at the state of play for the infrastructure and for the question of additionality, which we discussed, do you think it's too soon from the perspective of a development agency where you have to prioritize a lot of projects, because I guess finance is not unlimited, you need to look at those actions that have the more direct impact? Is it too soon to kind of already start with renewable hydrogen, or is it complementary? And if so, how do you make it work?
Yeah, well, for the question if it's too soon, I think I answered before a bit that I guess, yeah, it is never too soon in terms of course, building up capacities. But yeah, in terms of maybe thinking also, because you asked the question about the export hub potential, and is that something that should be looked into? And I think here it's something where I would say no, it would be nice, or the first step should always be to look for yeah, local hubs maybe, and to see is there maybe a local off-taker. Local doesn't have to be like in the same city, or it can also be the same region. It doesn't have to be the same country. Yeah, it can be thought a bit broader. So I guess this should be the first step, of course. And then and also if we look into export, it's always, yeah, we already have the competition then, no? It's as soon as we go on a global market, we compete to other global players. And as you said, we also work with other countries from other continents, and also other countries like Australia, the MENA region, Chile, Morocco. They are all preparing themselves for becoming the export hub of green hydrogen. So this is something that, of course, every country has to think about. Can we compete? Are we competitive in terms of renewable electricity prices and therefore also hydrogen prices? Can we get cheap access to investment also, because this makes a project also more expensive? And can we then yeah, play on this international market and compete internationally? So yeah, I think each country has to answer this for themselves. What makes more sense and what does make less sense regarding the export yeah, potential.
What do you think, Solomon? Do you see on your side some hot markets for hydrogen that are arising, where you can already tell to the people that are listening to us, go there, it's boiling, it's ready? I mean, how do you see the level of readiness of the hydrogen market in Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think I would first of all like to just stress something with regards to what Charlotte just mentioned. So in terms of infrastructure, this will take a while to be built up. So it's something that perhaps will have to be faced, but of course this decision would be at the different country levels to decide. But I personally think that it will take a while. So even if you would have to adapt existing infrastructure, this will take a while to happen. But one thing I would say is that right now, countries that are ready can already start to play a role in the global market. So if you look at if you look at hydrogen in terms of the local market, yes, you could find limitations. Maybe infrastructures and all of that are not there. But beyond that, if you look at the global market, if you look at the global opportunities in terms of international cooperation, if you look at the global market in terms of benefit, in terms of financial benefit for countries, so the opportunity is there. And so I think that there is really no reason for any country that has the potential to generate green hydrogen to not already start doing that. And then come to think about it also, if you talk about climate change, it's a global issue. So any kilogram of hydrogen that comes into the international market helps all of us in addressing the issue of climate change. So that's about that. With regards to where you have the hotspots, like I mentioned before, sorry, I really would not be able to give like specific locations now. This we will make available online, I mean, in the next couple of days from now. But I really would say that you have lots of places within Africa where you have potentials. Like I said before, sometimes it's difficult to find really one spot where you have everything. So where you have the 100% or you have the most of the renewable energy, but then also the most of the water resources that you would need for electrolysis, for example. So it makes it somehow one has to find just the most suitable condition where you find conducive for green hydrogen production. But one thing I would like to stress is that it would be important, especially for countries that are close to the coast, to consider very much the option of desalination. I said studies have shown that it adds to the cost of green hydrogen just probably 0.2%. Sorry, 0.5%, just adds about 0.5% to the cost, or maybe just about 1%. So it's like if you have a kilogram of hydrogen that costs €2, for example, so you are talking about a cost that increases by maybe 1 cent, or maximum 2 cents, if you have to use the desalination instead of groundwater. So this is what I would say.
Thank you, Solomon, and thank you for bringing in the desalination topic, because that is indeed something that was also very interesting in your presentation. Competition for resources. That was valid for water, that was valid for land. And obviously in Europe also that's a very big topic, because we have far less land available, so it's already, at least on the land side, a big issue in itself. And for water, it will come as well. But when it comes to the African continent, obviously the resources are huge. But we also know that for hydrogen, you need much more space, you need much more capacities, and that on the other hand, you also need to develop your electricity side. So at which point in time will there be a tipping point for this competition, which you say will happen, but at which point do you think the competition will become really an issue, where we might have to choose between one way or another?
Well, I think that first of all, it's important to be aware that this can happen at some point, and the reasons are obvious. The population will be growing, and then you would see also migration. You know, people move from one place to another. So a particular location may be free now, but maybe in the next 10 years, it's occupied because cities are growing. And then, like I talked about also in my presentation, you also should take into account the changes, environmental changes occasioned by global climate change. So rivers could dry up. There could be several things that could affect resources. But having said that, so I think that number one, it's important to keep this in mind from the very beginning. That's why in the H2Atlas project, we are looking at climate change scenario projected into the next 100 years. How will the resources be affected? Secondly, we are also taking into account the urban migration and looking at also how this affects electricity access, how this affects electricity demand. So where you have a demand of let's say 2,000 megawatts. It's possible in the next 10 years, this is doubled or this is tripled. So will you still have the resources to meet this? So it's important to take all of these into account and begin already from now, you know, in terms of the infrastructure that is built, in terms of capacity or the local capacity that's also harnessed, that this is taken into account. This is very important, because if this is not taken into account, like I said, a time really comes when you really have a conflict. So local scenarios, local preferences should be very well considered. Where you have a reserve, where you have in terms of land, where you have conservation areas, those should clearly be defined. This is one thing we have been trying to really straighten out with our local partners in the project. Because if you take a land area that is reserved, and then you place your infrastructure, whether it's a PV park or a wind park there, then it's possible that in the next 5-10 years you have a problem with the local people. So this I think is very important and must from the very first day, be part of the dialogue.
All right. Very important coordination and dialogue. Thank you, Solomon, for this. I think one way also to avoid competition is probably, and we have the same conversation again from Brussels, which is about the end use, because then you're not, if you have limited resources, if you have competition, you will need to choose very wisely where you will use each energy carrier, looking at the levels of efficiency. And Chipo, it's funny because your example on the car manufacturing raised some emotions from the audience, as I could see, because obviously in Europe, there is also this question of prioritizing electricity for road transport, where regular passenger cars, we have this feeling that maybe it will be much better through electricity, saving hydrogen for harder to abate sectors. I would really like to hear your reply, Chipo, on that, on how you see the best use cases actually for renewable hydrogen, and maybe you can come back on the examples of cars to see how the debate is going on the mobility side. And then for Tunate, I would like to have your views on Zimbabwe as well, but Chipo, maybe to react on the car example.
Okay, thank you. For the car example, it does not mean that the country is focusing its hydrogen for use in the car in the cars, but each industry is looking at how it can benefit from the green hydrogen. So the transport sector is also seeing an opportunity in it using that green hydrogen. But as a country, maybe it's alluded by Solomon, we need to look at the importance, maybe to prioritize the use of green hydrogen. For example, in Zimbabwe, our country's economy is based on agriculture. So if we produce some few tons of green hydrogen, our first priority would obviously go to the manufacture of ammonia, which will be used in the fertilizer. Then if we have some excess, then we would look into other uses. So for this South Africa, it doesn't mean they are focusing on it, but as an option, they don't want to be left behind. They want to find out what actually is the implication. Would it be sustained? So if they find it to be sustainable, and already they have established so with this Toyota, which I said they are wanting to, they've signed an agreement, they are not looking at the whole of the roads. They are just looking at just one road network, the N3 network, a road which joins Durban and Johannesburg. So that's where they want to do their testing, not on all types of vehicles, but just on the haulage trucks. So it's just a test which is being done, not that it's a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Chipo. And maybe also for the car, because when we look at the Volvos, etc., actually, we also think potentially that they could use green hydrogen with the steel. Because hydrogen, though, in the European debate, is associated with steel as well, and how steel could be greened via hydrogen. So that can be also potentially a link. And looking at you, Fortunate, because I think there's one question we've not been mentioning here. When we talk about social economic benefits, we need to make sure the industry is there. So we were talking, Chipo mentioned also the resources when it comes to materials. So we have in Zimbabwe a clear case for agriculture, and maybe you can tell us a bit about that. But do we have also such things as electrolyzer manufacture? I mean, do you see also this kind of activities which will be key to make sure the transition is owned locally. Do you see that happening in your country and in your region?
Okay, thank you so much for that important question. What I would suggest is that as you can see, the industry needs to be improved in terms of the necessary like manufacture of necessary equipment that is required. Like, for example, electrolyzers. We don't have any company that is actually manufacturing the electrolyzer locally. And I'm sure like several chemicals have been also importing the electrolyzers. So there is need to look at that whole value chain so that actually it can be improved. And there's also need for creation of jobs. You would find that, for example, the issue of electric vehicle, in Zimbabwe right now, there is what they call e-mobility strategy and framework that has been developed with the Ministry of Energy and Power Development. So you would find that green hydrogen can actually come into play in that the manufacture of fuel cells that can also be used in the electric vehicles, considering that there is already a strategy and a framework that has already been in place. So what I would say is that these areas complement each other, and there is actually a need to improve, especially in the setting up of the industry that supports this technology. And also the other important factor which needs also to be looked into is the issue of capacity building. You would find that if we actually make these technologies come into play without the necessary capacity building of the locals, it will be hard and it will be difficult to actually propagate this technology, and there will be slow uptake of these green hydrogen technologies. That's what I can contribute for now.
Thank you, Fortunate. And Charlotte, I would like to give you the closing question, actually, because I think we've seen also that, okay, the potential is enormous, challenges here and there for infrastructures and build up, and that needs to be thought of very, very carefully. But also we need to make sure that those benefits are harvested locally. So we need to look at the end uses that are really making sense. We need to build the industry, do the capacity building. It is not necessarily yet the case. There is a comment from the audience asking also to which extent, for example, green hydrogen could help countries reduce their dependence to fossil fuel imports. So the topic really of reaping socioeconomic benefits is high on the agenda when we talk about green hydrogen in Africa and the green diplomacy. What is the perspective of the GIZ on that? What do you think is the role of development agencies, development banks, in order to make sure that this actually conveys benefit to the African continent?
Yeah, very, very good question. Of course, yeah, the role of developing banks or also public money in general is that, yeah, we also attract private money, private investment. But I think a big role, a very important role, is also to bridge the gap between, yeah, the competitiveness and making like a business case, creating a business case if we are still a bit too far away of making it competitive right now. And if we spend, of course, tax money and yeah, money from the governments, we have to see, okay, does the spending of money make sense? Does it really benefit the ones we want to support? Are we making an impact in the countries where we spend the money? And this is why I think both government, but also development agencies and also yeah, banks should really look into sustainability criteria. So we at GIZ and also in my work, but also the European, yeah, everybody currently is looking, okay, what sustainability criteria should be set up, and in order to bring the benefit to the countries. And this sustainability criteria shouldn't only be environmental criteria, like we always say, with additionality, or also where does the carbon come from, where does the water come from, are there conflicts with land? But they should also, of course, have the social and the economic perspective. So seeing, okay, how do we benefit the population there? How do we train the people? Are research institutes involved? Do we use the capacities that are already and resources that we have in the countries? And I'm very happy to say that in my discussions also with development banks, I see that they're working really hard on creating those sustainability standards. So I talked to some development banks from EU level, German level, and so on, bilateral, international, and all of them are currently working on an investment scheme and looking, okay, what kind of criteria do we need? And I think there is also a big advantage right now because they have the learning curve also in regards to sustainability criteria from all other investments in the past, like the renewable energy investments, but also investments in infrastructure. So there's a good learning already, and I'm very positive that the banks and also other public givers have this considered.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So that's quite a program that we have ahead of us. I think we can all agree, a big, exciting program to even further diversify the perspective for international cooperation, international development, and really create a whole new flourishing industry, hopefully in Africa, making it one of the leading regions for renewable hydrogen. That would be very exciting. There are a lot of challenges or elements which we need to be thinking about, but I think already having those 4 pioneers on my panel, I'm very happy to see that you are actually involved and driving this from the ground, and I think it's already a very good start to make sure that those are in your hands, at least partly. So thanks a lot to everyone. I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope the audience did too. That was the end of this first day, or this side event of the SolarPower Summit, which was focused on solar opportunities in emerging markets. So a big thanks once again to all our panelists for this afternoon, Charlotte, Fortunate, Solomon, Chimpo. Thank you very much. Looking forward to continue the conversation offline because we have a lot of work. And to all of you, well, I can only wish you an amazing weekend. I hope it will be shiny for you. And we will all meet back on Monday for the day 1 officially of the SolarPower Summit, with a focus which will be more driven towards the European Union. However, that is not our last GET.invest session, because we will have another specific session which is co-organized with GET.invest about opportunities in emerging market and the links with the Green Deal diplomacy. That will be the session Solar for Global Change, and it will happen on the 13th. Until then, I hope you enjoy the day. A big thanks once again to everyone who made it possible. Our Director of Global Affairs, Mate Heiss, which has been working like a beast behind the scenes, obviously, and the rest of the team. And I really hope you enjoy the day. Wishing you an amazing weekend. See you soon.
Thank you. Thank you.